the supernatural is a big part of my journey with God, and it's been so powerful for me that it's completely transformed my life. The more I dig into it, the closer I get to God. And the oddest thing about it all is, like I told y'all multiple times, is that I came at this from the other direction. I didn't come at this from faith. It was actually the opposite. I was trying to prove to myself that God wasn't really real, in a sense, I guess you'd say. I've always been seeking God. I've always been searching for something. I never knew what that was really until here recently. I say recently, in the last few years, really, but man, the last few months especially, God has been really showing himself to me. And it's, you know how in the Bible, when the angels come up to the disciples or to any human at all, let me make sure my sound's on. All right, good. You know how in the Bible, the first thing they say is, do not be afraid, do not fear. Well, we'll get into that deeper also on why the angels were saying that, what could it have possibly been. But it's almost been a fear like that, in a sense, where I'm not afraid, but there are moments where God shows up so powerful it scares me. But not in a bad way, not in a sense where it's making me run away. It actually makes me want more. Does that make sense to you? I know that might sound crazy, but I'm starting to understand more and more when the disciples were talking about the fear of the Lord, the fear, and I know that could go multiple different ways, guys. And I'm not a Bible scholar here. I'm just like you. I just truly want to learn. I want God to transform my life. I want God to use me to show you guys what he can do in my life. And hopefully you guys will at least be open-minded enough to listen to my experiences. And I hope that you see God and that you go running to him. But yeah, guys. So that was I probably should stop playing his music like that. I don't think he'll care, but I don't know if it'll blow back in my face one day. So I should probably stop doing that until I talk to him. That was Joe Nestor. He's one of my favorite Christian artists. He's really talented. All right, let's hop over here, guys. We're gonna pull up Answers in Genesis on YouTube. If you look in the description below, you will find the link to their YouTube in case you want to go follow them and check them out. They've got a ton of good videos. This is gonna be more of an educational style show. So come hang out with me. Let's do this.
Heard this story before. The brave knight defeated the fire-breathing dragon. He rode off with the beautiful princess, and they lived happily ever after. You guys heard that?
You guys
kind
heard
of story
stuff like
before?
that?
Yeah.
Yep.
But is it true? I mean, are dragons nothing more than just the stuff of fables, Bodie?
Hey, you know what? The Bible talks about dragons.
Mhm.
And that right there should grab people's attention. It actually talks about dragons significantly in the Old Testament, not just one book, but all over throughout the Old Testament. So when the Bible speaks of a creature as being a real creature, we need to take notice.
That's right.
So let's dive into this. Let's jump into dragons. Let's look at them in a little bit more detail.
Yes, let's start off here, Bodie. Why do so many people in our culture today believe dragons are just mere fantasy? Where is that coming from?
I think the primary reason is we don't find them.
Mhm.
I mean, that's happened over and over again. When you look historically, if people couldn't find anything, they just thought, oh, it's a myth. And, we started to see trends like this. For example, there was the dodo bird. Okay, dodo is something I used to think you call your brother.
Yeah, you dodo bird.
But there's a bird, right? And there's these ancient accounts where people would see these dodos. These sailors would stop by and kill them, harvest them for meat, and take off. And so there's all these accounts of it. But when people started showing up there later on, they're like, we don't see any.
Yeah, a few hundred
Morning,
years ago,
Dan.
they thought the dodo bird was a myth
it-
because, number one, they were strange creatures. Number two, no one could find them. And number three, they only existed in these old stories and drawings. Kind of sound familiar? Does it kind of
Right.
parallel the dragons?
So for a long time, scientists were saying dodos are a myth until they found a specimen that had been stuffed and put in a museum. And they're like, oh, wow, it was real. And now, of course, they found some fossil evidence of it and so forth. So we need to be very careful of jumping into that. And what happened back in the day, think 15, 16, 1700s, a lot of the world wasn't discovered. We were still discovering places and
Good morning, Dane. Thank you for listening. We're going through, this is Answers in Genesis. He's going to go through on dragons and in the Bible. And this channel is really great, guys. I've learned a ton from it.
Finding places. And so if you didn't happen to find a creature in one place, you just assumed it was living somewhere else. This idea that they had gone extinct was just, who would have thought it?
Yeah, you
Nobody
think
would have
about
thought
like
that.
elephants and rhinos. Like, what would happen if they were to go extinct today? I mean, maybe 100 years, 200 years from now, they could also have that same logic and say,
They'd have the same
I
problem.
guess they were a myth. But
Right.
if it wasn't for all of our restrictions and Endangered Species Acts, elephants would probably go extinct as
They
well.
probably
And
would,
we
all
would
sorts of
just be
creatures.
doomed to repeat the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah. So dragons, dinosaurs and dragons, there's actually a connection between the two.
Mhm.
And I want people to understand the word dinosaur is a new word. Do you remember what year it was that it was invented?
1841.
Oh,
1841. Sir Richard
41. I
Owen
thought it
came
was
up with this
61.
term. It means terrible or
wrong.
terrifying lizard.
Mhm.
So we start digging up all these dinosaur bones and we start
What do you-
calling them dinosaurs, and we disconnected them from being dragon bones.
Yeah.
Because during this time, from about the 1500s to the 1800s, we really weren't finding too many dinosaur-like, dragon-like creatures.
Yeah, the
anymore.
bottom line
They
here, the
largely
belief
died
that
out.
dragons are a myth is actually a modern idea. It was invented
one.
after they went extinct. I mean, up until the 20th century, I mean, it was essentially, they were real creatures. I mean, think about from 1902 here, the Encyclopedia Britannica said that dragons might still exist, yet their numbers are few. And then just 8 years later, in 1910, all of a sudden the Encyclopedia Britannica published that dragons were myth.
And the reason that they published that is someone said there were still some dragons living up in the Alps. That's a mountain range over in Europe. A guy went up there, he couldn't find them, so he said, well, therefore they're a myth. You see, even then, people were struggling with this idea that things could go extinct. Now, in the 1800s, people were entertaining that idea, but it really wasn't super common at that particular point. We're starting to see it more and more as people started to dive into these ideas and look at fossils.
And we'll
so
dive into it more, but really, I would say the main reason why is because our culture has been heavily influenced by the evolutionary worldview, really by that religion of secular humanism. Even in our church today, so many Christians are buying into that evolutionary worldview.
Hello, hey Sharon, thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting, guys. I do have the live chat up. If y'all want to comment or a question, we can stop and talk about it. And I will respond to you guys. Like I said, I am here to learn, just like I hope you guys are. So yeah, Dane is going to be one of my co-hosts moving forward. We're going to be digging into these topics and a lot more, guys. So I hope that you enjoy what we're trying to build here. I do have the live chat on. So if you want to talk with me, just let me know.
In the evolutionary worldview, you know, obviously dinosaurs living with humans doesn't quite fit their timeline because dinosaurs went extinct millions of years ago.
Yeah.
So when they hear these legends, they say it's impossible. It can't be because it doesn't fit their timeline.
Right. Even though those are right there listed with all these other creatures, it's not just, from the Bible. We also see it from ancient commentaries, ancient historians, ancient scientists, and so forth. So we actually have quite a few accounts of these sorts of creatures. They just weren't called dinosaurs. They were called dragons.
Yeah.
But let's look at this from a biblical viewpoint. Let's just step back and start. You go back to the Bible. Dinosaurs, which by definition are actually land animals. Now, I know there's flying reptiles and sea reptiles. They're not actually technically considered dinosaurs. They would have been made on day 5 of creation. Dinosaurs would have been made on day 6 of creation. What day was man created? You guys remember? Day 6.
There you go. We got some smart kids here today.
So man and dinosaurs, which
Ah.
dinosaurs are a subset of dragons. Dragon is more of an overarching term. It included dinosaurs, but it also included other creatures. But they would have been living at the same time. So when we start with the Bible, it makes sense that they were living at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was a perfect world. Everything was perfect originally. That's what we expected from a perfect God. But then when Adam and Eve,
As we go through this, I want you guys to think about that. Like truly think about everything that we have been taught in school, everything that this society forms our brains to think, the millions of years old, the carbon dating. And no, again, guys, I'm not a scientist. I'm not all of these things. I'm just like you, and I'm digging a little bit deeper. I want to ask questions. And because I have seen time and time again how water can fossilize stuff in an instant if there's enough of it. And depending on the temperatures and depending on everything else going around, you're talking about you could make something look millions and millions of years old in the matter of a period of 2 years. And this has been tested time and time again. So why aren't these theories being talked about in education, but the other theories are? Keep that in mind. And all of those things that you teach you in school, remember, are just theories.
sinned and everything fell into sin, guess what? We started to see some animals turn. They start to become bad. They're meat eating and things like that. Originally, all the animals and man were vegetarian, according to Genesis 1:29 and 30. So some of these animals were eaten. Some of them were very vicious. Then we see the flood of Noah's day. Hey, were dinosaurs and dragon-like creatures, were they on the ark? What do you think?
They were,
Yes.
because remember, what did the Genesis 6 say? That every single pair of land animal, every kind of land animal had to go onto the ark. So obviously
Right.
they had to include dinosaur kinds. So you see from the biblical worldview, remember, as Christians, we got to always start all of our thinking based on God's word. We got to have our worldview based on the founded solid rock of God's word. And when we do, it's no surprise that there are accounts of dragons living among men.
And that's
It's
what we
consistent with the
expected.
Bible.
They come off the ark. They go all over the place. We expect to see these accounts.
They've been coming out the ark. They've been dying ever since. So
They've been
again,
dying ever since.
so of course, man lived among these awesome creatures from the very beginning. Day 5, he made the flying and sea creatures, which included the pterodactyl and the plesiosaur kind, which we would call dinosaurs today. And then, like Bodhi said, day 6, God made all the land animals, which included the dinosaurs and all the other land dragons. The same day he created man. And then they went onto the ark. And then most of them got flooded away, though. They
That's right. That's what, the bones we find in the ground, these different fossils and these dinosaur graveyards, for example, that's a record from the flood of Noah's day.
I want to trigger your mind to think about something for a minute, guys. Let's think about the Smithsonian for just a minute. Think about what they have found, what they're not showing us. And is it possible that some of these dinosaurs that they have put together based on what they think they look like were actually giant bones? Is it possible? Let me know as we go through this. Could it have been massive giants that they found in North America that they don't want us to know about? We will get deeper into that topic as well.
And that's actually in conflict with what the world says. The world assumes that these rock layers were laid down slowly and gradually over millions and billions of years. They assume there were no major catastrophes like a global flood that laid down those rock layers. But when we start with the Bible, there's a global flood. Everything under the whole heavens was covered with water. It laid down the vast majority of those rock layers quickly over the course of about a year.
That's
And
right.
of course, we've had rock layers since then, but most are from the flood of Noah's day. Same evidence. We find dinosaurs in 3 of those rock layers. Boom. That's
Yeah,
from the
so
flood.
they were found in the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And what's the
Correct.
reason why we only find those dinosaur bones mainly in those 3 strata? Bodhi?
Well, you got to understand the way that they define some of these rock layers. A rock layer is defined by what they find in it. And they have different index fossils. And if you find one of those index fossils and it's in one of those rock layers, that's what defines it. So let's say you have a rock layer that's not one of the dinosaur rock layers, like a Permian rock layer, for example, which is lower than where the 3 dinosaur rock layers are. So let's say you're looking in there and all of a sudden you find a dinosaur. Guess what happens? They redefine that rock layer to be one of those 3 dinosaur rock layers.
Yep.
You see, so it's kind of arbitrary the way that they do some of that. So you do have to be careful.
And I
of it.
believe you also have a chapter.
Dane, I want you to think about something for Saturday or for one of our episodes going forward. How do we start combating the scientists when the scientists are the only ones who are always right? Our education does not allow for outsiders. I mean, look at what they've done to Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Is that his name, Dane? I can't remember Carlson's name. I just came across him. I really like those guys. Go check them out, man. Ask questions, guys. Truly, don't just set aside everything you think you know. That's all we're doing here, and we are seeking the truth. That's it. And Jesus did say he is the way, the truth, and the life. We claim to believe in a supernatural God, while at the same time we are mixing what the world is telling us with what the Bible is telling us. Well, that's not too much faith now, is it? So, yes, I think it's extremely important that Christians get off their high horse and start talking about this type of stuff. We need to bring the supernatural back into the church for more than one reason. And I will go much deeper into that part with Dane.
In this book here called Dinosaurs, Dragons in the Bible, just came out by this guy, Bodhi Hodge. I believe it's one of the chapters actually talks about that. So if you guys want to dive more into those details there. But in terms of those fossils, obviously the most of the fossils that we see around us is the graveyard of the flood that happened 4,300 years ago. But what's the reason why we don't find humans, for example, with dinosaurs? What's the quick answer to that?
Well, there's a number of factors, but they probably weren't living in the same place. You know, like what are the odds if there was a global flood today? What are the odds you and a lion are going to get buried together? Probably
Right.
not going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Plus, there wasn't a whole lot of people. We sometimes think, oh, wow, so the world was populated like it is today. No, it really wasn't. There was only 10 generations from Adam to Noah. That's it, just 10 generations. So, I mean,
Wow.
you could potentially get up, a few million people, but you also have to think 120 years before before the flood, God said, hold it, the earth is violent. Every thought is evil all the time. Think of this. If the entire world was that evil and that terrible and that violent, and they're all murderers, the population of the earth cuts in half in one day.
Mhm.
How many people were actually there by the
And guys, it's not that hard to really imagine a world being that violent and that sick and that twisted and that evil now, is it? Because just like in the Bible, where it tells us the end times will be just like the days of Noah. In the days of Noah, they were manipulating DNA. They were manipulating animal DNA. I truly believe that's how we got dogs today, and the little dog breeds that we have. They came from them manipulating the DNA back in the ancient history. Yes, guys, I'm a nerd. I love this stuff, and I might sound like a conspiracy theorist. That's okay.
time the flood actually hit? Probably wasn't a whole lot of people anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And plus, by that logical thinking, a lot of evolutionists say, because we don't find humans alongside dinosaurs, therefore they couldn't have lived together. But obviously, if you think about it, that's a logical fallacy there. I mean, obviously, we don't find crocodiles buried with humans. Did they ever say that crocodiles and humans didn't live together? No, of course not.
exactly.
So,
Or
you see that.
coelacanths. That's another one.
Yeah, exactly.
So, these are called, one sense, living fossils,
Mhm.
but, we've lived at the same time. Just because you see certain things in the fossil record isn't necessarily an indication whether they live together or not.
Yeah, if you guys want more details, check out Bodhi's book. There's a chapter on that, talks a little bit more about those details there.
Dinosaurs,
But
dragons.
let's go back to the Bible real quick
Okay.
here. So, in terms of the Bible here, why don't we find the word dinosaur in the Bible, Bodhi?
Well, like we said, the word dinosaur is a new word. Prior to 1841, they would have been known as a different creature. They would have been called dragons.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of our early translations of the Bible into English were in the 15 and 1600s. You might think of the Geneva Bible that the Pilgrims brought over. That was done in the 1500s. Tyndale, there was the Coverdale, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible.
1775
And people
Bible.
are arguing over which Bible. And so what they did is they came together and they got a standardized translation, which we call the King James.
Yeah.
1611, of course, it's gone through a number of revisions. But most of our modern translations, one way or another, still have roots and ties back to the King James. So it makes sense why we don't find it in there, because the Bible was essentially translated before the word even existed.
Yeah, you kids have any guesses on where dragons are mentioned in the Bible? Any guesses here?
21 times in
That's
the Old
right.
Testament.
Job 40 talks about the behemoth, right? Sort of like a sauropod or a giant brachiosaurus, as well as Job 41 talks about the Leviathan,
Right.
right?
Leviathan's
The fire-breathing
called a dragon.
Leviathans. He's called a dragon there.
Yeah.
Maybe like a Chronosaurus or something similar to that. And the Hebrew word there is called tannin or tananim, which means serpent, dragon, or sea monster based on the context. It's not just in Job, but it's in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Isaiah. That's just to name a few. It's all over
Yeah.
the Old Testament.
Right. We find that word in there. And, it's interesting, though. When we look at modern translations, we don't even find the word
Yeah.
dragon sometimes, which
Yeah.
is very odd.
Why
You'll
is
see
that?
it in a metaphorical sense. There was a big shift in the 1800s, particularly the late 1800s, where people said, hey, maybe if these dragons are a myth, which was the idea floating around out there,
The Bible
well,
will be a
then
myth.
they can't be real creatures. So we shouldn't translate this as dragon. We should translate it as something else. And then there's
How many of you have heard the argument from the science community against the Bible on unicorns? How many of you? Let me know if you have heard the argument from the other side about unicorns in the Bible. So that means the Bible isn't real. Let me know in the live chat, and in a few minutes, I will let you know what I believe the unicorn is in the Bible.
a little lull period in there where they didn't know what to translate it as. So they're translating it as palm trees and all sorts of creatures and things like that. And you're like, what are they doing? And then a lot of them actually settled on jackals, even though there's another Hebrew word for jackal that is used in the Bible. But that was actually a very odd shift. And we're just now starting to see people say, hey, maybe we should go back here and reevaluate this.
Even if you read some of the footnotes nowadays, the behemoth is maybe an elephant or a rhino or a hippo or something like that. But those things have tails.
You hear what he just said? I would have to say the Bible, when it speaks of a unicorn, it is talking about the one-horn rhino, not the two-horn rhino, the one-horn rhino. And back then, they would have probably called that a unicorn, right? I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think?
Sounds like a cedar tree, right?
Yeah,
The elephant and the
yeah, their
and the-
description doesn't match, do they? No, they really don't. When you actually look at the description given for something like Leviathan or something
Mhm.
like the behemoth, they just don't match our modern creatures, whether it's an elephant, whether it's a hippo, or in the situation of a Leviathan, it doesn't match a crocodile. For example, this Leviathan, you could not pierce it with darts or arrows, and
Mhm.
yet a crocodile could be shot with an arrow.
And God gives a lot
Um,
of detail in terms of
Mhm.
like what the behemoth was, what
Right.
the Leviathan was, and he mentions it along all of these other real creatures. So obviously, it doesn't make sense for God to all of a sudden switch to a mythological creature in between that sentence
Right.
there. So obviously, it had to be a real creature.
Yeah,
You know
why
what else
would
we
you?
find? We find a lot of evidence of man and dinosaurs living at the same time. That's
That's right.
not necessarily just from the Bible either.
Yeah.
Even though we have plenty of examples, if it's in the Bible, of course, that means it's true. But we find a lot of confirmational evidence of this.
Mhm.
These would be like petroglyphs and cave drawings
Mhm.
and etchings and things like that in various parts of the world. And I actually like studying some of this. There's
Yeah.
whole books that's been written on it.
The
Of course, I have a
Chinese,
chapter in the book.
Yeah, we have a chapter.
the Chinese, what's it called, Dane? If you're still listening, with the animals and stuff, I guess it's their yearly thing. Why would they have every animal that is a real animal and then randomly throw in a dragon, a mythological creature? Ask yourself that. Why would they have everything else as factual and real and then just randomly throw in a myth and just something that means everything to them? And then you go back to the cave drawings like he's talking about. These people wouldn't have just imagined those type. They drew what they saw back then. And if we are to believe that they were dumber than we are, like our school likes to teach us, which is impossible. Yeah, you can't be dumber than Americans today. It's impossible. The way they destroyed education. Mm-mm.
After
Dives
on
into
now,
some of
virtually
these.
every single continent around the world, there's examples of paintings of walls, pottery, textiles, petroglyphs, those ancient artwork of dragons. But are those for real?
Yeah, I mean, and they're right alongside creatures you'd readily recognize. For example, Bishop Bell died around the year 1500. He's buried in a church there in England. And aren't you guys glad we don't bury people in the church nowadays? I remember when I was over in England, I'd be walking around in these churches and I'm like walking on all the graves. I'm like, I just don't feel right about this.
Mhm.
But Bishop Bell died there, and he's got a brassing that goes along the outside that kind of outlines where his grave is right there. And they have a rug over it now, but when you're there, if you pull that back, you can see on this brassing, there's all sorts of little animals. And you're like, oh, I know that one. Yep, I know that one. I know. That one looks like a dinosaur. That one looks like a dinosaur. So you see these dinosaur dragon-looking creatures right there. And, that's
What do you think, guys? If you're watching this and you're not already as deep into these topics as I am, or a conspiracy theorist as I am, what do you think about that stuff? Really? I mean, how would you connect that with what they teach us today? The dinosaurs were millions of years old. A comet came down, wiped them out. Humans weren't walking around with them. How was this possible? And I'm not trying to attack you. I'm truly trying to understand. Maybe you see something that I don't. That's all I'm asking here. Jeremy says my birth year is a Chinese dragon. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. I mean, why would they have their birth year, the birth year, birth month, whatever? I can't remember how China does it. But they have the rooster and everything that is a real animal, and then randomly they throw in a Chinese dragon. Maybe we're the ones who aren't as smart as we think we are.
just one of many examples.
Mhm.
And that's in the 1500s.
Yeah, there's several examples in Bodhi's book, so make sure you guys check it out. But just as a flavor here, I mean, there was a petroglyph by the Anasazi natives, looks strikingly like a sauropod dinosaur, in other words, a dragon. There's a pictograph made by Native Americans in Utah of a flying dragon, kind of looks like a pterosaur. There's even a wall-mounted scripture, I think this one's amazing, in Cambodia of a dragon that looks like a stegosaurus.
Looks like a stegosaur, yeah, kind
That
of
one's
muzzled even, yeah.
amazing. Yeah, just the picture right there. Plus,
Yeah.
there's paintings in Australia by the Aborigines of a water dragon, kind of looks like a plesiosaur, and on it goes. Plus, there's
Yeah.
even flags, there's banners. I mean, just look at the Welsh flag today. Look at the Imperial China flag today. There's dragons on these flags. So obviously, people for a long time believed that these were real creatures.
Right. Let me explain something for just a moment. The word dragon, what's the equivalent of what we're actually talking about here. Is dinosaurs and dragons basically just the same thing? No, dragon is
Lizard?
more of an overarching term. It included the dinosaurs, but it also includes the flying reptiles, a lot of the sea reptiles. Think of like a plesiosaur, for example, or Kronosaurus kind of thing. It would even include large serpentine snake-like creatures, or even things like crocodiles and alligators. By technical definition, they would actually fit under this auspice of being a dragon. So sometimes when I see the word dragon, it's like, well, now let me look at the context. Is this a flying dragon, a sea dragon, or a land dragon? If it's a land dragon, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, is this particularly a dinosaur? See, dinosaurs actually have a unique definition too. A lot of people don't realize that. A dinosaur is